Over the course of life, the baggage adds up, the barnacles stick to the hull over time, and that can be a really bleak outlook on life, except for this other great truth of life, which is that there is such a thing as redemption. There is such a thing as getting things straightened out. There is such a thing as admitting problems and changing course. And if you get to a place in life where you don't believe people can change, I think you're in a very, very bleak place. But there's always hope. There's always optimism for yourself, for others, for situations, when you believe that change is possible, that redemption is possible. And I, for one, especially believe that because even though I fully understand that there are a bunch of you who are here who aren't sure what to make of the whole God thing, for me, I do think there's a God. I think he's the one described in the Bible. And I think this is a God who intervenes in the world, in people's lives. And I think that redemption is not just some abstract concept, but I think it's something that is miraculous in its nature. I think if anything is redeemed, God gets credit for that. And I think that there's a degree of optimism that I'm able to hold on to even in my most cynical moments, not because so much that, I think I can change and I can figure everything out, but because I do think this God is an actual being, the actual all-powerful being, and I do think that this God is very into redemption. All of that said, it seems like there are certain patterns to how redemption, how turning the ship around, how scraping the barnacles off of the hull, how escaping the lost woods, how stopping the wheels from spinning in place, how whatever metaphor you want to use, it seems like there's a certain pattern that occurs when that works out. And I think we're witnessing that pattern in Nehemiah chapter 9. It's very, very promising. If you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, they've got a pretty time-tested program for redemption, for overcoming addiction, figuring out broken stuff in life, taking things that seem like it'll never get better and helping people to figure out how to make it better. And what is the first step in AA? I mean, it's what people who attend that say when they introduce themselves, right? It's honesty. They introduce themselves. I'm so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic. There's so much power in finally just admitting the stuff that is messed up about us. And maybe we don't need to go and scream that from the mountaintops to everybody. Maybe some stuff is better directed just to people with whom we have trust or people who've wronged and want to get it right with. But whether what went wrong happened very publicly and therefore apologizing probably needs to follow suit and happen very publicly, or whether what went wrong happened very privately and therefore maybe apologizing and being honest about that happens a little more privately, either way, honesty is where it starts, right? Because you're not going to do any of the other steps. You're not going to change course if you don't think there's something that requires a course change. You're not going to take steps to overcome a problem if you don't actually believe that there's a problem. Well, this prayer in Nehemiah 9 being led by Ezra the priest and repeated back by this gathering of all the descendants of Abraham is an inspiring example of that first step of honesty. They've admitted they have a problem. They've admitted that they've kind of hit rock bottom, and they've admitted that they cannot solve this problem on their own, and they're turning back to the source of hope and redemption that has been there all along, and they're calling that source of hope and redemption by name. That is God, the God of Abraham. And this honesty isn't just like, oh, we screwed up, we're really sorry. This honesty has been blow by blow through pretty much every era of getting it wrong that has existed in the entire story. And the last little era that we have here that we read yesterday and talked about a little bit is the era of the kings, when there was a kingdom provided by God, as recorded in 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. And according to this prayer, picking it up in Nehemiah 9:33, things weren't right during this era of the kings either, despite all the abundance that God provided. And all that has happened to us, you've been just, you've acted faithfully while we did wrong. Our kings, our leaders, our priests, and our fathers did not follow your law. They didn't pay attention to your commands or the warnings you gave them. Even while they were in their kingdom, enjoying your great goodness to them in the spacious and fertile land you gave them, they did not serve you or turn from their evil ways. That's brutal, painful honesty. It's tough to admit, but when you finally are able to say it, it's like a drink of water in a hot desert. Well, here's the wrap up to the prayer. We haven't read this part yet, verse 36. But see, We're slaves today, slaves in the land you gave our forefathers so they could eat its fruit and other good things it produces. Because of our sins, its abundant harvest goes to the kings you have placed over us. They rule over our bodies and our cattle as they please. We are in great distress. The whole story comes full circle. Remember, very early on in this prayer, we get an account of being in Egypt. You saw the suffering of our forefathers in Egypt. You heard their cry at the Red Sea. The way this prayer is structured, we get all this stuff in between, 2 full pages as I sit here and look at it, but we're right back where we started, still in the lost woods. It's just a different empire in a different century, but the cruel irony of this return to slavery, as they describe it here at the end of the prayer, is now they're slaves in their own land. Not some foreign land where you kind of get it because we were guests and I guess we wore out our welcome. They didn't like us anymore. Things went badly. That can happen. But here, they're in the land they conquered and they lost it. It slipped through their fingers. Why? Because they didn't listen to God. They were disobedient. They got fat and happy and amused by themselves and believed that they deserved credit for the good things in their lives. This isn't my accusation of them. This is me repeating back their own words about what went wrong. Because of our sins, its abundant harvest goes to the kings you have placed over us. Now, isn't this a curious relationship that we see in the Bible between the rulers of Persia, the Achaemenid kings, particularly Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, and Artaxerxes, and the descendants of Abraham? Because these kings overwhelmingly are pretty good. From time to time, they get bamboozled by somebody in a royal court here or there who has an axe to grind with the Jewish people. But for the most part, they come around and God opens their eyes. And absolutely, the scriptures hold them out as being put there on purpose. But all of the tension between these two understandings of Persia that we see in the Bible, one, that the kings are pretty cool and well respected and held out as being all right and from God, and two, that still the Jewish people are slaves in their own land and they are oppressed and want this oppression off of them. The explanation for this tension is once again laid out in the book of Habakkuk, which was written 150, 160 years before the events you and I are looking at here in Nehemiah. And you'll recall there's just 2 big questions in this tiny little prophetic book. Question 1 is, God, if the things we're doing are so bad that you're going to punish us, why do you allow us to keep doing it? Why don't you stop us if this is wrong and we don't want all of this destruction and violence? And question number 2, why are you using wicked, evil people even worse than us, to punish us? And then God gives a really good answer, and Habakkuk is like, oh, great answer, cool, okie dokie, I totally get it. But long story short, the reality is that both are true. God's people get it wrong, and then God punishes them just like he said he would, using these foreign peoples. And then also God is going to judge these foreign peoples. There's this mountain of stuff. There's entire books of the Old Testament, like Nahum, that are dedicated to God's judgment toward these other people groups. And Persia got theirs as well at the hands of Alexander the Great about 100 years after the stuff that we're reading about here in the book of Nehemiah. Was Persia a righteous empire? Well, some good things came out of it. I think it was better than any of the other ancient empires, but no, it was weird and it had problems too. But the Old Testament isn't about Persia. It's not about their problems. The Old Testament is about the descendants of Abraham and God's relationship with them. And ultimately, it's about God's character and God's redemption and what it's going to take to straighten out the whole human problem. So at the most basic level, to sit around and worry about Persia and be like, well, what about them? What about them? What about them? Is sort of just deflection. They're not the point. They're not who's in view. Let's keep the main thing here. And the main thing is that we're finally to a place of honesty about exactly what has gone wrong. And with that honesty about what went wrong, there's also honesty about the reality of the situation we're in. We can't put lipstick on this anymore, guys. We can't say, well, Persia's a great empire and the kings are pretty nice to us most of the time when they remember to be that way. And they're great buildings and there's a great economy and we have a cool mail system with horses. It's very fascinating. This is a very, very good time to be alive. No, we got to be honest about the mess we made and we got to be honest about the mess that we're in. But what's exciting is that the next thing we get from them is this final statement, which is what I want to leave off with today. At the very end of Nehemiah chapter 9, there is one concluding accord issued by all the people. It's an in light of all of this kind of statement. So we've gotten honest, and now it's time to implement real change. Here's what that sounds like. Nehemiah 9:38. In view of all this, we are making a binding agreement, putting it in writing, and our leaders, our Levites, and our priests are affixing their seals to it. Now you might hear that and be like, well, that's a little ambiguous. What exactly is the binding agreement? Well, it's the terms of the covenant. They've renewed their covenant oath with God, which has been painstakingly detailed for a gajillion pages before this, going way back to the early times in the Old Testament. They aren't making a new deal with God. They are committing themselves to an honest expression and a deep commitment to the existing deal with God. And as we've talked about, a whole lot of it sticks. And that's pretty exciting. As we've also hinted at a little bit, some new creative ways to get things wrong start to emerge at this point. And unfortunately, we're going to have to talk about that as well. Nehemiah chapter 9. What a great rapid fire overview of the whole story, framed in a way that is honest about what's gone wrong, but also that is forward looking, and also that is a reminder that, look, as people, maybe we're not going to get things exactly right in this physical world, but that doesn't mean that redemption isn't a thing. That doesn't mean that hope isn't a thing. That doesn't mean that course correction isn't a thing. Those are things. There is hope, and maybe there's nothing you can do about what happened yesterday or last week or whatever. Maybe we can only control what we can control from this moment forward. Look, obviously we can't do anything about what happened before. We can't go back and unmake time and unmake mistakes and unmake things that we said and did. What we can do is try to do justice for those things and square accounts as best as possible. What we can do is tell the truth about that story, tell the truth about what we got wrong. And the other thing we can do is put a stake in the ground and say, from here on out on this road, it needs to look like this. And with the help of God, it's going to be different than it has been, because I'm going to live in honesty from this point forward. I'm going to live in dependence on God. So is what we're getting from these people here at the end of Nehemiah perfect? No. Is it pretty dang good and something to be encouraged by and even see as an example? Yeah, I think so. And that's how I'm feeling coming out of Nehemiah chapter 9. I really appreciate all of you. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.